let's take a look at the pulse controller and some of the features that really program the system and set it up. First, we actually have the pulse controller, which is the handset control. It has foot pedals that plug into the back, as well as your RF module. Now, your RF module comes in 900 megahertz, 868, or Ethernet built into this housing here. So that housing could live on the desktop or really anywhere you're going to be using the system. The control and the power for it uses a battery, or it uses AC adapter. For this tutorial, we're just going to plug the battery in, which is a BPU 30 battery on the back of the handset. And once I plug the battery in, you'll notice the power button is this top left button up here. So once I push that top left button, the system's going to start up and initialize. You'll notice that instantly it connects to the sled. So whenever it connects, you'll notice the sled says sled off. Let's start by walking through the main features of the pulse controller and kind of what we see right at face value. So again, the top left is your power button. Your top right is your standby button. So anytime we're not operating the system, we always want to be in standby or off. You have in-stop 1 and in-stop 2, which is also left or your right in-stop. You have your acceleration knob, which is how fast it takes off from sitting still. Your deceleration knob means your sensitivity towards the in-stop. A higher percentage means I'm getting closer to the in-stop before it starts to brake. The lower percentage, the further away it starts to brake. And then my overall max speed. You'll also notice the center dial on your decel looks a little unique and a little different. That's because that's also a menu button. So if I was to select that, you'll notice it takes me into the menu, and then I can simply go home, which is here, or status, which is here. Now if I click that status button, it does show me my voltage of the system. It gives me system health right into that menu, so I can see that my batteries are at 50.5 volts. And my encoders are good and everything looks really healthy. So I can go back home. When I'm back onto the home screen, you're going to notice that I get a battery voltage here on my top left and a battery voltage on the top right. The top left is going to be my handset battery voltage, which says 15.3 volts. That's the battery that's actually in the pulse. And the top right is the batteries that are in the sled. Those are some of the things that I'm watching as I'm operating and making sure that the system's got the right battery voltage and power for the job. Whenever I'm ready to set the system up, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the tuning of the system. And the tuning is really your power and demand that we're putting into the system. So just because I turn the pulse on doesn't mean it's engaged. As a matter of fact, if I try to hit the pulse controller joystick, it doesn't move, and that's because it's in standby mode. That's really important to make sure the system's off before we actually start rolling into shots. But I'm going to go into the menu, and I'm going to go down to drive tuning. Now the drive tuning, you'll notice it says P, D, and slip. I'm going to call P power and D demand. So think about it as power is your overall power the system's allowed to take, and the demand, which is your D, is how quickly it gets there. The higher number, the more peppy or the quicker that system's going to get up to speed. The lower the value, the slower, the softer. The reason that's important is if I'm on a job and I really want to do a slow broadcast job, I might tune this really low. And really low might be a 20% or maybe an 18% P value, and my D might be, say, 10% value. And a high speed, maybe if I'm shooting soccer or football or something that needs really quick movement, I might take that to 25% P, and my D might be around 20%. Or something around that range, but we'll play with it and see. Now your slip is how much you're allowing your wheel to slip. I prefer a higher slip, maybe around 50% slip. Here we're set at 80, which is fine, and it's really personal preference. If you set to a really low slip, say around 20%, you're going to notice the system has a braking that happens because it's trying to not allow that system to slip. Most track systems do have slip naturally, just because it's a rubber wheel on a rail. So we want to keep that value probably around 50% to 60%. That's a pretty healthy spot. Another thing to keep in mind when you're in your P and D settings, this is a pretty common, I'd say like a 20% P and a 10% D for some of your broadcast moves. When you want to get into high-speed moves, it's really important not to go above a certain value. And it's not that it can't handle that, it's just the system becomes very, very fast. So the question becomes, can it go past its end stops? Yes. Just like a sports car, when it slams on its brake, it takes a while to slow down. So we would never recommend going above a P value of 50. Preferably 40 is cranking fast. Really learn your speeds as you get in there, but I would say never go over above 50. There's no really need to, because that's dumping a lot of power into the system. And then your D value would probably never go above 20. A 50-20 P and D value is a very peppy system. That's basically running it in sport mode and would allow the system to track at really high speeds. And again, as an operator, just get in there, learn those lower values of your power and demand, and slowly work your way up so you get familiar with it. The worst thing we want you to do is start with 50-20 and go learn the system. So let's get you down to about 20 and 10, start there, and then slowly work your way up. So once I've set that, I'm going to go back into my home. I'm going to notice that I've got my takeoff, my landing, and my max speed all set pretty low, which is, I think, very healthy. So I'm going to keep that around 15% takeoff. My landing's around 70%, and my max speed's around 12. So I'm going to activate the system by selecting the on or the standby button, which turns the sled to the on. And the very first thing I can do is go set some end stops. So I simply drive it all the way to the left, and you'll notice the system moves to the left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive it all the way into that spring, which will set that left end stop. Now I'm on a short track, so if you notice it on a short track, it's pretty slow. So I can simply reach up and I can turn my acceleration and my top speed up, and it moves a lot quicker. On a short track, it's fine, but when you get to 100 foot or beyond track, you might have and want it to go a lot faster. So now that my end stops are set, you'll notice it's 14 feet from the left and 0 feet to the right. That's because I'm on the end stop. So I simply move between those stops. You'll notice that my feet will change as the system moves, but so will my speed. You'll also see the percentage here, which shows the throttle input right on that pulse controller, which is really important. So the main thing to keep in mind is whenever you're setting your P and D value, that's based on the type of shot you're doing. So most of the features you're going to be working with is that P or power and D for demand. Now let's walk through a few other features about setting maybe automation and control with the system. So I'm going to go back into the menu screen. Starting at the top, you'll notice it says brake, turn on. Now this is really an important when you have the track on a slope. If you would turn the brake on, and selecting that basically allows the system to stop whenever you let go of the stick or the foot pedals. Really, I'd say that's very rare that you would need that, only in rare instances where you want the brake on. For the most part, let's keep that turned off. Whoops. Let's go back in, turn brake to off. So let's go into power. So power here on this feature, now we're showing our latest firmware, and power control, it says no options. The reason being is in the future, we want to have future upgrades and firmware upgrades that allow that power control to be useful in the pulse controller. Currently, we're shipping these systems with the feature built into the menu, but it's not actually a function we're putting into the rhythm track just yet, but it is in your pulse controller. The drive tuning we just covered was something very important, but I'm going to go back into that drive tuning. You'll notice 18% power, 10% D, which is your demand, slips at 60. You'll notice it has a next button. I'm going to click that next button, and that's going to show you brake and coast. So the brake feature, the higher percentage I have on that brake, the more it's going to allow that system to hold at the end stops. For most jobs, I actually don't use my brake. It uses a little bit of power. I don't really need that. If I have the track on a slope, I might increase that brake value maybe up to 40% or even 50%. But for the most part, I actually turn the brake off. I find that I don't really need it in most jobs where the track is flat and straight. And the coast feature, I also operate at 0%. It is a feature we've added into this, so if I want to go into the coast, I want to increase that. What this is allowing me to do is to add a little bit more power before the system stops, so I can add a little bit of coast to it. For the most part, I actually keep this at 0, but you've got anywhere from 0 to all the way to 250% coast. It's really user preference. But ultimately, my brake and my coast, I usually prefer a 0%. I like the feel that I have at my fingertips with the joystick, but also with my foot pedals as I'm operating the system. Let's go back to the home button. I'm going to go back into the menu, and I'm going to go down to options. Options where I have things like throttle direction. So if I click RF, or I'll start with the top, which is RF link, that tells me what channel I'm on. I'm on 915 megahertz. I'm at channel 15. If you have to get another pulse controller and you misplaced yours, you can simply go to channel 15. You can lock that in and you're off and going. I'll click the back button. I'll go down to joystick. This gives me my deadband on the joystick. It gives me my function. What's really important here is you'll notice this system's set up for a riser, a digital riser. So if I was to go over to the function of my x-axis, which is my left and right, which drives the system, you'll notice my y-axis, which is my up and down, I have set it to aux. That's auxiliary power, which drives my riser. But also, I have reverse. So if I don't like the direction it's going, so my left goes right, my right goes left, I simply go over here to reverse, and I can select no. Now my y-axis, which is my up and down, I'm simply going to push that up. You notice my riser is actually driving up. And then if I go down, my riser now is driving down. So that's another great feature that I can do right from my console, right from the joystick, by simply adding the deadband I want, making sure that the function's set to auxiliary, and then I can change the direction if I really want to. And then the z-axis, which is a twist function, is not active in the system, so there's no function there. So really, your x is your left and right, and your y is your up and down driving your digital riser, and that's set to auxiliary. And then I can change my reverse if I want. I'm going to hit the back button, go to miscellaneous. This gives me my sound. It does have a beep. We don't like the beep, so we simply turn it off. You can change your theme and change the color of the screen itself. My personal favorite, mint, and then color. If you're unlike the rest of us here in the States and you're smart and using the metric system, you simply just go over to metric, and now instead of reading feet, you're reading meters and meters per second, which is awesome. But for us here in the States, so I'm going to keep it to USCS. And then your system for the pulse controller will not have the temperature function built in, because that's actually running a brushless control. So it will not have a temperature function, but that option is in here. So it's something really unique to have. If I changed all those settings and I like what it's doing, and I'm going to save that for the job, I'm simply going to go down to save as default. I'm going to click that save as default. It's going to ask me to confirm. I'm going to simply confirm that. And now every time I start my pulse controller, it'll save everything except the end stops. It's really important not to save the end stops, because we want the operator to set that every time he gets on the job. Everything else is saved. If I got the last option, which is my about, it's running my firmware and giving me the firmware version I'm on and my system ID. And that's what that's set in here in that options menu. So if I simply go back to the main menu, the last setting, and probably the most important and the most favorite, is your auto modes. I'm going to scroll down and click auto modes. It only is functional if your end stops are set. So because my left and my right are set, I'm going to go down, and I'm going to start you off with boomerang, the bottom one here. So when I click boomerang, it's going to give me options. If I scroll down to mode, you're going to notice it says repeater. Repeater's our favorite because that just sets, it goes left, it goes right, it does that all day long. But if I toggle through these, you'll notice it's one shot. Now, when I click one shot and I activate it by going up to state where it says off, if I click that, it activates that move. Now, one shot simply goes the furthest away from your end stop. It picks the furthest end stop away, and it does that move and stops. If I go to the next one, that just does end stop left, meaning one shot left. So no matter where I'm at on the track, it always goes left. If I click it again, one shot right. No matter where I'm on the track, it always goes one shot to the right. Click it again, now we're back in boomerang. Boomerang is simply go down to the furthest end stop, come back and stop. That's boomerang feature in that boomerang mode. And again, our favorite is repeater. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that repeater button, and I'm going to go up here to state. Now before I hit on, this is really important when you're automation modes, is I always turn my speed all the way down. The reason being is when I hit that, it goes. So I'm going to click state active. You'll notice it flashes auto drive active. It's a warning to the operator, meaning it's fully active. Because my speed's set to 0, I simply dial that speed up, and now the system's engaging and it's moving at the rate I want it to. Now, why that's really important is when I'm on a job and I'm shooting maybe a talking head segment and I really don't want it to move very quickly, I can simply dial that down or up as needed. And that's a really important feature with the system. But it's such an incredible option to have right into this pulse controller. Now, you'll notice if I go to the home button, I've got all those features built right here in the sled. It tells me how fast I'm going, tells me my end stops, and all that's really great. Now, if I want to stop the move at any point, I can either dial down the speed or I can select the standby. When I select the standby, it goes to off. Now, turning the standby back on does not activate your automation again. You simply go back into your menu, auto modes, boomerang, and simply click the on, and we're back right into automation again. So that's the features of how to operate that boomerang mode or the repeater mode, which is our favorite. You'll also notice another feature we added here, which is your left endpoint offset and your right endpoint offset. What that does is if I click my right endpoint, I can increase or I should say decrease the amount of movement in my end stop. So if I set my end stops at 30 feet, I can bring my right endpoint in 2 feet or 5 feet. And that's just another safety feature. If I've got a dialogue shot and I really want to keep it set to maybe 8 feet from my end stop, I can simply dial that in. It's just another user preference that allows us to really have that option and move those end stops in if I want to. You can never move them out, but you can always move them in, which is a safety feature. Let's go back to that record and replay. So if I click record and replay, you'll notice that I have 4 files set up here. What's really unique about this function is that it's really reading what the pulse controller is giving it. So if you're working on a film set and you have a dialogue scene, I can simply go to File 1. I can click File 1. I can hit Record. I'm recording. I'm going to turn the sled on, and I simply hit the Start button. Now I'm actually recording that move as if it's recording whatever I'm putting into it. And say I want to just move a slow move here to the left, and I want to move a slow move to the right. Now again, if you're recording a move, you're probably doing high-speed moves, or you're doing something very specific. So I'm simply going to do those two moves. I'm going to slide it back to the middle, and I'm going to hit the stop button. Now, it stopped that move. It stopped the recording. I'm going to go back into my auto modes, record and replay. You'll notice here file 1 says 21s, or 21 seconds. So I'm going to click on that, and I can replay that move. So now what it's doing is it's loading the replay, and I simply hit the start button, and now it's actually playing that move based on what my input was on the pulse controller. And that's the record and replay. You'll notice I have in this auto mode function for record and replay, I have up to 4 files I can save. And it'll save those in there, and at any point I can recall that file 1 through file 4. So the repeater and boomerang is probably our favorite. It's what we use most of the time, but those features are built in. And again, all of the features that we just talked about, you want to make sure if you like what you have, save that as default. You can confirm that. You go back home, and you've simply got all those features right at your fingertips. That's a simple overview of the pulse controller, all the menu, all the features that we would probably want to share with you and make sure that you understood how to use. And there's plenty more options to learn, but this gives us a basic to start setting shots and going to work right away.